Welcome to my course Law and Society in Taiwan. This video presents you with an update to Unit 7 on climate change and sustainable development. Did you know that in 2023, Taiwan passed a law that is vital for our survival on this earth? It tackles a global problem that is causing enormous damages around the world in the form of rising temperatures, heat waves, droughts, extreme weather, rising sea levels, floodings, loss of biodiversity, food insecurity, just to give a few examples. I'm sure you got it now. We are talking about climate change. And the law that I want to introduce to you in this video is called Climate Change Response Act. Listen and you will realize how we can and must take action to stop global warming and build a more sustainable future. I will start with a brief overview before presenting the general principles outlined in Chapter 1 of the Climate Change Response Act and conclude with some questions for you. So let's start with the overview. As you know, laws are enacted by the Legislative Yuan in Taiwan, but often the initiative for doing so comes from the Executive Yuan. Also, in this case, it was Premier Su of the Executive Yuan who instructed the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, to draft a bill in August 2022. The bill was then discussed in the Legislative Yuan and passed in a third reading in January 2023. It was officially promulgated by the President on the 15th of February 2023. As a result, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction and Management Act was revised and its name changed to Climate Change Response Act. Now, can you guess why the name was changed from Greenhouse Gas Reduction and Management Act to Climate Change Response Act? Well, because the new law wants to provide a more comprehensive response to climate change, not just focusing on mitigation, but also stressing the importance of adapting to climate change. That's why they called it the Climate Change Response Act. We will understand the background and purpose of the Climate Change Response Act even better by taking a closer look at the general principles stipulated in Chapter 1. Article 1 starts by highlighting the importance of justice. Finding a solution to climate change is not just about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It's also about achieving environmental justice, meaning that those who harm the environment should pay. It requires a just transition, meaning that we have to consult with those people who are affected, respect their human rights, and assist them while moving forward towards a low-carbon society. Only then can we ensure sustainable development, a vision that includes finding solutions for climate change. Moving on to Article 4, we find that the long-term national greenhouse gas emission reduction goal is net zero emission by 2050. Now, this is the most important provision of the new law. So far, the goal was to reduce 50% of greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, but now it's zero emission. How can this be achieved? Well, the trick here is the word net. So it's net zero, not absolutely zero emissions. Article 3 of the Climate Change Response Act thus defines net zero emission as achieving an overall balance between emissions and carbon sinks. In other words, we can still have emissions on the one hand, but on the other hand, we have to try to remove them from the atmosphere by storing them in certain places such as forests, oceans, or other carbon sinks. In this context, Article 4 mentions that negative emission technologies shall be developed, a term that is also defined in Article 3 as a mechanism to remove, absorb, or store greenhouse gas emissions. To achieve this long-term goal, all levels of government shall implement greenhouse gas reduction together with citizens, entities, and organizations. This emphasizes the principle of cooperation, along with the need to disclose information to citizens and encourage everyone's participation. Article 5 of the Climate Change Response Act stresses that equal emphasis shall be placed on environmental protection, economic development, social justice, intergenerational equity, and the support of vulnerable groups. Does this remind you of another very important law that we discussed in this course? What about the Constitution, Article 10 of the additional articles? There we find a similar provision stipulating that environmental protection shall be equal with economic development. There it also refers to parts of society that need special protection, such as women, handicapped, or aborigines. Article 5 lists other legal and policy principles, notably the realization of a nuclear-free homeland. Again, you might recall this goal was already enshrined in the Basic Environment Act back in 2002. Last but not least, Article 5 makes it clear that the environment has value and those who use or harm it have to pay a price, among others in form of greenhouse gas emission fees. More on this in another video. For now, let me ask you some questions to make sure you understand what we have been discussing so far. Does the goal of achieving net zero emissions have a legal basis? If so, where? Does it make a difference whether or not the goal of achieving net zero emissions is enshrined in a law? What is the legal deadline to achieve net zero emissions or carbon neutrality? If you are not sure how to answer the above questions or would like to find out more about the Climate Change Response Act, take a look at these references. It's always good to read the black letter law, especially for us lawyers. We will continue to analyze the Climate Change Response Act in another video. See you there.